At Thanksgiving dinner, the air, usually thick with festive cheer and the comforting aroma of roasted turkey, suddenly became a battlefield. My mother, Eliza, raised her champagne flute, her eyes, usually warm, now piercing daggers aimed directly at me, Isabella, her only daughter, clad in the somber dignity of my military uniform. "You ungrateful wretch," she snarled, her voice a whip, crack that silenced the entire table. "You are a blemish on this family's name. Get out." The collective gasp was almost audible, yet no one dared to challenge her decree. They did not understand the true nature of the soldier before them. A soldier is never defeated by words. A soldier's spirit, once forged in the crucible of duty, is never broken by mere words. I am Sergeant Isabella Stone, 28 years of age, and as I stepped through the heavy, ornate door of my family's opulent Beacon Hill estate, the deceptive warmth of the house felt like a betrayal. The rich scent of roasted turkey and sage, a fragrance so intrinsically linked to the spirit of Thanksgiving, offered no solace to the tight, anxious knot in my stomach. This dread was a familiar companion, accompanying me into this house every year, tucked deep within the pocket of my coat. The official letter felt like a lead weight, its crisp edges a silent, desperate prayer. Sergeant Isabella Stone. I had rehearsed this moment countless times before my mirror, practicing how to present this profound chapter of my life, hoping it would not be summarily dismissed as another trivial anecdote. My entire life had been a relentless battle for a fleeting sliver of their approval, and tonight, I had dared to hope would be different. From the grand entryway, I observed them, gathered in the formal living room. My sister, Charlotte, a brilliant legal mind, laughed vivaciously at something our mother, Eliza, had uttered. My younger brother, Lucas, a rising star in the cutthroat world of finance, stood proudly beside them, his arm wrapped around his seemingly flawless fiancée, Sophia. Eliza's face was illuminated with a pride she reserved exclusively for them. Her voice resonated through the room as she lauded Charlotte's latest legal triumph and Lucas's newest lucrative deal. I took a deep, bracing breath, my fingers clenching around the letter. All I desired was a single, solitary moment to slip into their sphere and at long last be truly seen. As we took our places at the gleaming mahogany table, adorned with our family's finest silver, the roasted turkey presented a picturesque, golden, brown tableau. The homemade cranberry sauce glowed ruby red in a crystal bowl, and the sweet, comforting scent of pumpkin pie wafted from the kitchen. It was all meticulously perfect, a flawless stage set for the ugly drama poised to unfold. My mother, Eliza, raised her sparkling baccarat champagne flute, tapping it gently to command the room's undivided attention. It was time for her annual Thanksgiving address. "To family," she began, her gaze sweeping across us with an almost regal air. She sang the praises of Charlotte's Harvard law degree and toasted Lucas's incredible business acumen. Her words, like warm golden syrup, cascaded over her two prized children. Then her gaze, as cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel, landed squarely upon me. "And of course, there's Isabella," she enunciated, her voice laced with a dismissive sigh. "With her marketing job and her little weekend army hobby." A few polite, strained chuckles echoed around the table. My cheeks burned with a shame so profound it felt physical. A hobby. That was her cruel descriptor for my sacred oath to this nation. The freezing winter nights spent enduring grueling training exercises, the immense, crushing weight of responsibility I carried. In her carefully curated world of Ivy League credentials and burgeoning financial portfolios, my service was deemed no more significant than a pottery class. The word, hobby, stung, a venomous barb, but I clung to the letter in my pocket. "I had to try, Mum," I ventured, my voice wavering almost imperceptibly. "I was promoted to sergeant." Eliza placed her wine glass down. The sound was a sharp, a dry clack that reverberated through the now silent room, cutting the festive atmosphere like a knife. Then she laughed. It was not a sound of genuine joy. It was a cold, brittle noise that shattered the remaining warmth in the room. "Promoted?" she scoffed, her eyes wide with mock disbelief. "To what end, Isabella?" so you can waste your life playing in the mud with other failures. I poured a fortune into giving you the finest education money could buy. And for what? Her voice escalated, her composed mask cracking, revealing the raw ugliness beneath. She was on her feet now, leaning precariously over the table, her face contorted in a grotesque mask of fury. You ungrateful child, you are a stain on this family. Get out! The words hung in the air, vibrating with pure, unadulterated venom. Then, a deafening silence descended. It was absolute. My father, Richard, bowed his head, his gaze fixed rigidly on the majestic turkey on his plate. Charlotte and Lucas stared blankly at the pristine white linen tablecloth, their faces perfectly neutral, their complicity screaming louder than any direct accusation. Not a single one of them met my gaze. Not a single one uttered a word. I did not cry. Rage and an icy pain had seared my tear ducts shut. In that defining moment, my military training, a lifetime of discipline, instinctively took over. My spine, of its own accord, straightened. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping softly against the polished wood, and rose. I looked at each of them, one by one, allowing my eyes to linger on their silent, averted faces. Their quiet cowardice was a betrayal sharper, more profound than my mother's brutal words. I did not need to say anything else. Without a sound, I turned and walked away from the table. I walked past the tantalizing scent of the feast I would not partake in, past the faint, melancholic notes of jazz music, and out of the heavy oak door. I left behind a family rotten to its very core, a house built on the shifting sands of hypocrisy. The cold, crisp November air of Boston struck my face, a stark, bracing contrast to the suffocating warmth inside. For the first time, the chilling bite of the night felt more like a welcoming embrace than the home from which I had just been cast out. Eliza's cruel words echoed relentlessly in my head, a vicious, repeating loop. But beneath their torment, a deeper, more painful question began to form its insidious shape. Why? Why is it always me? Curled on the worn, familiar sofa in my dearest friend Sarah's apartment, the lingering question, why me, hung heavy in the quiet air, a spectral presence in the room. The initial shock from Thanksgiving had slowly bled away, leaving behind the familiar, hollow ache of a wound that somehow never truly healed. My mind, desperate for a tangible answer, drifted back through the years, meticulously searching through a lifetime of carefully filed away slights, looking for the precise moment the fracture began, the origin of my perplexing otherness. It settled, with a chilling certainty, on the year I turned 16. I had won first place in a prestigious statewide art competition. This was no quaint school fair. It was a significant, juried event, and the achievement felt like a sunburst of pure joy within my chest. I vividly recall the entire walk home from the gallery, clutching the heavy, sparkling crystal trophy in my hands. It was substantial, undeniably real. My heart hammered against my ribs with a pure, unadulterated excitement. I couldn't wait to show them, to finally present an accomplishment so tangible, so universally validated by the outside world, that they couldn't possibly ignore or diminish it. I found them, as always, in the formal living room. I held it out, a silent offering. My mother gazed at the trophy, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes, before her face settled into its customary polite, distant smile. Her words, spoken with a soft, dismissive warmth that was more cutting than any shout, still echo in my mind. "What a sweet hobby, darling," she'd purred, patting my arm as if I were a child presenting a macaroni necklace. "But let's focus on your assets now. That's your future. A hobby." All those late nights hunched over a drawing board, the raw passion I poured into every single line, the unique way I perceived the world in shapes and shadows, all of it reduced to a quaint, childish pastime. A few weeks later, my heart sank into the pit of my stomach, a crushing weight. I was searching for an old box in the dusty basement when I saw it. There, sitting ignominiously beside a stack of old, yellowing newspapers destined for recycling, was my trophy. It wasn't broken or even chipped. It was simply discarded, placed among the trash, deemed utterly unworthy of a space in our home. It was a clear, silent message etched in the very air. You and the things you love do not belong here? The memories kept coming, each one another brutal layer of proof. I was 18 and the thin, dreaded envelope from Yale, Charlotte's alma mater, had arrived. The rejection letter felt like a public declaration of my inherent failure. It was in the suffocating shadow of that profound disappointment that I made a life-altering decision. I enlisted in the Army National Guard. I craved the unwavering structure, the rigorous discipline, the fierce, undeniable sense of purpose and pride that was so glaringly absent within the walls of my own home. It felt like a noble path, a tangible way to serve something larger, more meaningful than the suffocating, materialistic expectations of the Stone family. I can still vividly picture my mother's face as I showed her the enlistment letter. She wasn't angry, which somehow felt infinitely worse. Her expression was one of profound, wary pity, as if she were gazing upon a wounded animal she had no idea how to mend. "Oh, Isabella," she sighed, her voice dripping with a condescending sorrow that made my skin crawl. "Is this what you choose when you can't compete with your siblings? You're throwing your life away on this whim." My father, ever the conflict avoider, had merely mumbled something vague about life experience before quickly excusing himself from the room. They saw my oath to my country not as a profound commitment, but as a pitiful consolation prize. It was the last resort for the daughter who simply couldn't keep up. A death sentence for my future, as my mother later so cruelly dubbed it. Amidst these cold, sharp memories, one warm, radiant image surfaced, a beacon in the suffocating darkness. My grandfather, Arthur, a decorated Marine Corps veteran. He was the only one, the singular soul, who ever truly saw all the disparate parts of me and believed they fit together perfectly. When I was a little girl, he'd take me to the majestic Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, spending countless hours with me in front of the Monettes and the Sargents. He never once criticized my childish crayon and marker drawings. Instead, he'd study them with a serious, thoughtful expression and say, his voice a gravelly rumble, "This one's got the eye of an artist and the heart of a warrior." He saw no conflict, no contradiction between the two. The day I enlisted, he was the one who drove me to the recruitment station. Before I went inside, he pressed his old, worn challenge coin into my palm. The metal was cool and heavy against my skin, a solid, grounding anchor. He leaned in and whispered, his voice rough with an emotion the rest of my family never showed me. "Don't you ever let anyone tell you that you're not good enough. Courage comes in many forms, Isabella, and yours is one of the rarest." He passed away 2 years ago, taking with him the only real, unconditional validation I had ever known. His absence was a constant, aching void. My thoughts snapped back to the present. I was in Sarah's living room, the city lights of Boston twinkling outside her window like distant, unconcerned stars. She had quietly placed a steaming mug of chamomile tea in my hands and gently draped a warm, heavy blanket over my shoulders. She didn't offer empty platitudes or easy reassurances. She simply sat with me in the profound silence for a long, comforting time before looking at me, her expression firm and unwavering. "They don't deserve you, Isabella," she said, her voice cutting through my haze of memories with absolute, undeniable certainty. And in that singular moment, hearing that simple, unvarnished truth from someone else, I finally understood the devastating reality. The Thanksgiving dinner was not an isolated incident, it was the explosive, inevitable climax of a 28-year war of attrition. A war I was always destined to lose, because the rules were written by them for them. I hadn't just been unceremoniously kicked out of my home. I had, in fact, been living in a gilded cage. A prison my entire life, and my jailer had in her blinding rage unknowingly handed me the very key to my liberation. The revelation was liberating, but it was also terrifying, a freefall into an unknown, uncharted world. But what, I wondered, was I supposed to do with this sudden, painful freedom? My new life began in a small, third-floor studio apartment in Allston. The neighborhood pulsed with a vibrant, gritty energy. teeming with the students and artists who called it home. It was a world away from the stately, suffocating silence of Beacon Hill. The move itself was a blur of rented U-Haul trucks and the hollow echo of my own footsteps in an empty room that smelled of old paint and someone else's forgotten life. Those first few nights were the hardest. The profound, unyielding silence of my new reality was, somehow, louder and more piercing than my mother's screams had ever been. It was the crushing sound of being utterly, completely untethered. To keep the relentless ghosts of my own thoughts at bay, I threw myself into my work at the marketing firm with a ferocious, desperate energy. I became a relentless machine of productivity. I volunteered for every extra project, eagerly took on the clients no one else wanted, and stayed late every single night, long after the office had emptied. The city lights would glitter outside my window as I hunched over my desk, a welcome, mesmerizing distraction. I filled my weekends with freelance gigs, typing away until my eyes burned with exhaustion. My brain became a constant, welcome buzzes of looming deadlines and client feedback, a ceaseless shield of noise that mercifully drowned out the more painful whispers of memory. My body, however, paid the steep price. My diet consisted primarily of greasy takeout from the cheap Thai, placed down the street, and sodium-rich instant ramen noodles that I'd often eat standing over the sink. I lost a few pounds I truly couldn't afford to lose, and the dark, bruised-looking circles under my eyes became permanent, disfiguring fixtures. This, I realized, was the true cost of freedom. It wasn't a soaring, triumphant feeling. It was a stark, cold, and deeply lonely currency, paid for with overwhelming exhaustion and crushing isolation. Then came Christmas. The first real snow of the season fell, blanketing Boston in a soft, quiet white that seemed to muffle the entire world, muting every sound. I found myself aimlessly scrolling through social media on my phone, a self-destructive impulse I couldn't resist. And there it was, a photo album titled Stone Family Christmas Eve, posted by Charlotte. The very first picture showed the towering Fraser fir, sparkling with 1,000 tiny lights, reaching majestically up to the high ceiling of the Beacon Hill brownstone. I saw the mountain of brightly wrapped presents, the gleam of polished silver, and the radiant, impossibly perfect smiles on their faces. My mother, in a festive red dress, was raising a glass. My father stood stoically beside her, his arm protectively around her. Charlotte, Lucas, and Sophia looked impossibly perfect. The caption beneath read, "Nothing better than being with the ones who matter most." No one was missing from that tableau. No one had called. That night, I sat utterly alone on the bare hardwood floor of my apartment, a single lamp casting a lonely pool of light. My Christmas dinner was a meager packet of chicken-flavored ramen, its meager steam fogging up the cold window pane as I stared out into the impenetrable darkness. The festive streetlights outside blurred as my eyes finally filled with the long-held tears. They weren't tears of self-pity, but of a brutal, final acceptance. To them, I had truly vanished. I was a ghost they had successfully exorcised from their pristine, carefully constructed lives. But as the tears dried on my cheeks, a strange, unexpected sense of profound relief washed over me. The exhausting performance was finally over. I no longer had to play the part of someone I wasn't, no longer had to contort myself into a role I was never meant for. In my weakest moments, when the loneliness felt like an unbearable physical weight, my military training became my salvation. It was the unshakable bedrock upon which I meticulously began to rebuild my life. Every morning, no matter how utterly exhausted I felt, my internal drill sergeant had me up at no 500. I'd pull on my running shoes and head out into the pre-dawn chill for a solitary run along the Charles River. The freezing air would burn my lungs, a sharp, cleansing pain that miraculously cleared my mind. Back in my apartment, I would clean with meticulous precision, making my bed with crisp, tight hospital corners. Just like in basic training, these small, structured acts were my anchors in a tumultuous sea of chaos. They gave me a tangible sense of control when everything else felt like it was spinning wildly away from me. During those early morning runs, I began listening to podcasts. I stumbled upon Brené Brown, and her profound words about vulnerability and courage hit me like a lightning bolt, illuminating the darkness. Vulnerability is not weakness. Her calm, steady voice resonated through my headphones. It's our greatest measure of courage. It reframed my entire agonizing experience. I wasn't weak for feeling hurt. I was in the arena. I was covered in dust and blood. Perhaps I was getting my ass kicked, but I was still standing. I was still fighting. Slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, things began to shift. At work, an unexpected opportunity arose with a notoriously difficult client. Drawing on my newfound resolve, I pitched a bold, unconventional marketing campaign. My boss was skeptical, his brow furrowed with palpable doubt. But something in my presentation, a new, hard-won confidence, convinced him to give me a chance. I poured every ounce of my being into it. I worked sleepless nights, channeling not just my strategic thinking, but also the artistic creativity my family had tried so relentlessly to stamp out. For the very first time, I blended logic and art, strategy and soul, without apology, and it worked. The campaign was a phenomenal success. The day the congratulatory email from the client's CEO landed in my inbox, forwarded by my own boss with a simple, "Incredible work, Isabella," I had to excuse myself. I walked into the sterile quiet of the office restroom, locked the stall door, and slid down to the cool tile floor. And I cried. Not tears of sadness, but tears of overwhelming, triumphant joy. This was the first piece of genuine recognition I had earned entirely on my own, without the parasitic influence of the stone name or their begrudging charity. It was a small victory, yes, but it was profoundly mine. I wonder, have you ever had a moment like that? A small win that felt like it changed absolutely everything. It was a tiny spark, but in the profound darkness I had been living in, it felt as bright and as warm as the summer sun. Sarah was more than just the person who gave me a place to stay in those first few numb, desolate days. She was my anchor, my unwavering constant in the wreckage of my old life. When she saw me sinking into the silent, gray quicksand of my own sorrow, she would physically pull me out of the apartment, insisting we walk along the esplanade, even in the biting Boston wind. When I couldn't eat, she'd show up with a pint of Ben & Jerry's Cherry Garcia ice cream, my favorite, and sit with me in comfortable, understanding silence. She listened patiently as I retold the same old stories of hurt and humiliation, a broken record of my past, never once showing a flicker of judgment or impatience. One evening, as I was spiraling, relentlessly blaming myself for not being smarter, stronger, or simply different enough, she put her hands firmly on my shoulders, forcing me to meet her unwavering gaze. Her eyes were clear and resolute. "Isabella, stop," she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. "This is not on you. You were part of a rotten system that was designed for you to fail. You are not the one who needs to change." Her words were like a compass in a storm. They didn't magically heal the wound, but they gave me a true north, a clear direction to face whenever I got lost in the blinding fog of self-doubt. On her advice, I found Dr. Evelyn Shaw, a compassionate therapist specializing in family dynamics. Her office was a warm, quiet sanctuary overlooking the Boston Public Garden. The soft, inviting chairs, the calming scent of lavender, and the gentle ticking of a grandfather clock in the corner all seemed designed to soothe the wounded soul. It was there, in that safe, sacred space, that I first heard the terms that would give a name to my entire bewildering existence: scapegoat and golden child. Dr. Shaw explained, with a calm empathy that was profoundly healing, that I had been unknowingly cast in the insidious role of the family scapegoat. I was the designated carrier for all their unprocessed anger, their profound disappointments, their deep-seated insecurities. Charlotte and Lucas, conversely, were the golden children, the pristine vessels for all their hopes and ambitions. Every session with her felt like an archaeological dig into my very own soul. We carefully unearthed years of buried pain, layer by excruciating layer. She helped me understand that my suffering was real. It was valid. And it finally had a name. It wasn't just in my head. Dr. Shaw gave me the indispensable tools to begin rebuilding my shattered self-worth, beginning with the simple, revolutionary act of acknowledging what I had endured. The world began to open up in other unexpected ways, too. One brisk Saturday afternoon, seeking refuge from the echoing silence of my own apartment, I was sketching intently in a small, sunlit coffee shop in Cambridge. I was utterly lost in the intricate lines on the page when a man at the next table caught my eye. He was looking at my sketchbook, not with a quick, polite glance, but with genuine, quiet curiosity. He introduced himself as Leo Sterling, an architect. He didn't offer empty praise. Instead, he asked insightful questions about my process. He genuinely wanted to know the meaning behind the sharp, angular lines, the profound emotion I was striving to convey in the shadowed spaces. Our conversation flowed effortlessly, moving from the abstract world of art to the concrete realm of architecture, and then to the strange and winding paths of life itself. For the first time with someone new, I didn't edit my story. I told him candidly about my marketing job, about my profound commitment to the Guard, and even about the deep, painful rifts with my family. He just listened. He didn't try to fix it, didn't offer unsolicited advice. He simply listened, his eyes filled with a deep, unwavering empathy that felt like a healing balm. When I finished speaking, he was quiet for a moment, and then he uttered something that struck me to my very core. "It sounds to me," he said softly, his voice gentle but firm, "like you're the only one in your family who dared to be authentic." That single sentence, that unconditional acceptance of my truth, was the very thing I had spent my entire life starving for. It was a glass of cool water after a lifetime spent wandering in the desert. Slowly, almost without me consciously realizing it, a new family began to form around me. It wasn't one bound by the arbitrary ties of blood or the suffocating weight of obligation, but by conscious choice and profound mutual respect. There was Sarah, my steadfast, loyal anchor, always there. There was Dr. Shaw, my wise and gentle guide, illuminating my path. And now there was Leo, who brought with him a kind of calm, healthy love I had never known was possible. They were my people, a family of my own choosing who had, in turn, also chosen me. They celebrated the woman I was in all my beautiful complexity, the disciplined sergeant and the sensitive artist. They didn't ask me to be smaller, quieter, or different. They simply asked me to be me. Lying in bed one night, the familiar silence of my apartment no longer felt like a threat. It felt like profound peace. For the first time in my 28 years, I felt like I truly belonged somewhere, not because of a last name or a bloodline, but because of genuine understanding and true, heartfelt appreciation. My life had finally found a peaceful, steady rhythm. My work was deeply fulfilling. My small apartment felt like a true home, a sanctuary, and my relationship with Leo was growing deeper and more wonderful every single day. I was meticulously building a life entirely on my own terms, a life of quiet joy. And then, as if on cue, the past came relentlessly calling. It was a Tuesday evening. Leo and I were cooking dinner together, laughing easily as I tried, perhaps unsuccessfully, to explain the nuanced difference between two complex marketing concepts. My phone buzzed insistently with a call from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but something, an inexplicable pull, made me answer. "Hello." A hesitant, yet undeniably familiar voice answered. "Isabella, it's Dad." My heart gave a painful, visceral thud against my ribs. It was the first time I'd heard his voice in nearly 6 months. For a single, foolish second, a tiny flicker of hope ignited within me. Perhaps he was calling to check in. Perhaps he was sorry. That fleeting hope died almost instantly, crushed by the reality of his strained, awkward voice. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't mention my job or inquire about my health. He cleared his throat with a practiced ease and got straight to the cold, hard point. "Isabella, listen. Your mother? She hasn't been well." The classic opening. "Lucas and Sophia are having their engagement party soon. And your mother wants you to be there. She wants you to come home." The carefully chosen words, She isn't well. She wants you home," were a transparent manipulation, a thinly veiled guise. I could almost hear the invisible strings in every carefully crafted syllable. This wasn't a genuine invitation. It was a summons, artfully disguised as a desperate plea for familial harmony. It wasn't about me at all. It was about what they needed from me. A few days later, my brother Lucas asked to meet. We met at a neutral coffee shop near the bustling Boston Common, a place with no shared history for us, no lingering ghosts. He looked utterly exhausted, the skin under his eyes puffy and darkened with strain. He fidgeted nervously with his coffee cup, steadfastly avoiding my gaze. "You should come, Isabella," he murmured, his voice barely audible, laced with a plea. "Just for one night for me, for Sophia. Mom is making everything incredibly difficult." I remembered the little boy who used to be my closest confidant, my partner in every innocent childhood crime, before the rigid family roles became so harshly defined. I looked at the man he had become, a man now burdened with the monumental task of managing our mother's volatile moods. "Lucas, let me ask you something honestly," I said, my voice calm and steady, one yielding. "Do you want me there because you miss me, or because you want Mom to stop making your life difficult?" He looked down, his shoulders slumping in a gesture of profound resignation. He couldn't answer, and in his silence, I had my answer. He wasn't there for me. He was there, selfishly, for himself. He was the golden child, still tragically willing to sacrifice the family scapegoat on the altar of his own peace and quiet, just to keep the dysfunctional system running smoothly. The realization left a bitter, metallic taste in my mouth. That night I told Leo absolutely everything. He listened patiently, his presence a warm, solid comfort, an anchor in my storm. He didn't tell me what to do or what to think. He simply held me and asked one simple, yet profoundly clarifying question: "Will going back bring you peace, Isabella?" His question cut through all the debilitating noise, all the ingrained guilt and crushing obligation. It went straight to the raw, pulsating heart of the matter. Going back wasn't about healing. It was about walking willingly back into the same old, insidious trap, volunteering to wear the heavy chains of judgment and criticism once more. It was about sacrificing my hard-won peace for their temporary, fleeting comfort. Later, as if the universe itself wanted to give me one more undeniable sign, a text message lit up my phone. It was from Sophia, Lucas's fiancée. "Isabella, I know this is none of my business, but I see how Eliza treats people. Please don't come if you don't want to. Your peace of mind is the most important thing." That simple act of validation from a near stranger, someone with a clear, outside perspective, held more power and meant more to me than any hollow appeal to family ever could. My polite refusal, communicated through Lucas, was not well received. Eliza didn't call me to yell. She did something far, far worse. She escalated. She bypassed me entirely and went straight for the foundation of my new life. She called the commanding officer of my National Guard unit. My CO called me later that day, his voice a disquieting mixture of professional concern and utter confusion. "Sergeant Stone," he began, choosing his words with deliberate care, "I received a call today from a woman identifying herself as your mother, Eliza Stone." A cold dread snaked its way up my spine, chilling me to the bone. "She claimed to be a worried mother," he continued. "She made some allegations that you were having psychological issues, that you were unstable. She requested that the unit intervene to get you to return home to your family." I listened, a silent, ice-cold fury building, crystallizing inside me. My mother wasn't just trying to control my personal life anymore. She was actively, maliciously trying to sabotage my military career. She was willing to destroy my hard-earned reputation, my honor, and the one thing in my life I had meticulously built entirely for myself, by myself. This was no longer a mere family disagreement. This was an undeniable act of war. After the chilling call with my commanding officer, I didn't panic. The simmering rage that had been building for months didn't explode into a chaotic, unproductive tantrum. It crystallized. It became a cold, hard, Diamond, sharp clarity that cut through all the residual fear and gnawing confusion. For the very first time, I felt a singular, unshakable purpose. My first action was to calmly and professionally explain the long and sordid history of my family's behavior to my CO. I laid out the insidious pattern of manipulation and belittlement. He listened intently, he understood completely, and he assured me of his full support and unwavering trust, documenting the incident as a civilian harassment attempt. The institution I had sworn to serve trusted me implicitly. The one I was born into did not. That stark contrast solidified absolutely everything. That evening, the air in my apartment was still and charged with an unspoken, heavy tension. I sat down on the sofa directly across from Leo. The usual warmth and easy laughter between us was replaced by a quiet, shared gravity. He knew instinctively that this was a pivotal turning point. I looked at him, my resolve hardening with every steady beat of my heart. "I'm going to call her," I said, my voice even and low, filled with a newfound steel. "And I need you to do something for me. I need you to record this call." Leo simply nodded, his expression serious and unwavering. There was no hesitation, no questioning of my judgment. He just pulled out his phone, opened the voice memo app, and pressed the red button, the small digital timer beginning its silent, relentless count. He placed the phone on the coffee table between us, a silent electronic witness to the coming confrontation. I took a deep, deliberate breath. It wasn't a breath to calm my nerves or quell a flutter of fear. It was a breath to focus my energy, to gather every ounce of strength I had forged in fire and solitude. In that moment, I wasn't Isabella, the scared and hurt daughter, anymore. I was Sergeant Stone of the United States Army National Guard, and I was about to establish a new chain of command. I dialed her number from memory. She picked up on the second ring, her voice dripping with a smug, cloying triumph that made my stomach churn with disgust. "Ah, so you finally decided to call your mother. I knew you would. They got in touch, didn't they?" I didn't let her set the tone. I didn't engage with her premise or her premature victory lap. My voice was flat, devoid of all emotion, as if I were delivering a formal after-action report. "Eliza." It was the first time in my life I had ever addressed her by her first name. The silence on the other end of the line was electric, a sudden, gaping void where her smugness used to be. I had her full, undivided attention. "You called my commanding officer," I stated, not as a question, but as the first item in a list of undeniable charges. "You slandered my name. You attempted to sabotage my career with malicious lies about my mental stability." That action crossed every conceivable line of human decency. The silence stretched for another agonizing second, a beat of pure shock, then the inevitable explosion. "How dare you use that name with me?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with the raw fury of a queen whose absolute authority had just been challenged. "I did what I did because I'm trying to help you. You're out of control." "No." I cut her off, my voice as cold and sharp as a shard of ice slicing cleanly through her hysteria. "You did that because you are no longer able to control me. So you will listen to me now. And you will listen very carefully. From this moment forward, you have no authority in my life. You have no say. You will not call me. You will not text me. You will not show up at my place of work. And you will have no further contact with my military unit or any of my associates. If you or anyone else from this family, acting on your behalf, violate these clearly established terms, I will consider it an act of harassment and I will take immediate legal action. Is that understood?" I could hear her ragged, desperate gasps for air on the other end of the line. She was sputtering, the sound of a tyrant losing her iron grip, her primary weapon, my fear of her, rendered utterly useless. You're threatening your own mother," she finally managed to stammer, her voice laced with disbelief. Every word I spoke next was deliberate, etched with the finality of a judge's solemn sentence. I leaned forward slightly, my gaze fixed on the phone. "This is not a threat, Eliza. This is a promise." I let the words hang in the air for a deliberate beat, letting their full, crushing weight land. You spent 28 years meticulously creating a monster with your cruelty, your narcissism, and your profound contempt. Now you get to face her. I hope you have a lovely engagement party." I ended the call before she could utter another single word, my thumb pressing the screen with a definitive, satisfying finality. The silence that filled the room was absolute, profound, and utterly liberating. I let out a long, slow breath, a single exhalation that felt like it carried the immense weight of my entire life with it. 28 years of trying, of hoping, of being crushed, all gone, released. I looked up at Leo. His eyes weren't filled with pity, the look I had grown so accustomed to my entire life. They were wide with a raw, profound admiration that took my breath away. He reached over and silently stopped the recording. I hadn't just drawn a mere line in the sand. I had built a fortress wall, high and impenetrable, right through the very center of my life, and I knew with a certainty that resonated deep in my bones that this wasn't the end. The war had only just begun. I wasted no time. The declaration of war had been made, and now it was time to meticulously prepare the battlefield. My small apartment transformed into a makeshift war room. With Leo as my trusted second in command, we worked with a quiet, focused intensity that belied the enormity of the task. I remembered a profound line from Sun Tzu's The Art of War, a book my grandfather had insisted I read. Know your enemy and know yourself, and you need not fear the result of 100 battles. My family's greatest weakness was their obsessive fixation on their public image, their meticulously constructed, perfect facade. My greatest strength was the undeniable truth. On my laptop I created a new, encrypted folder titled simply Operation Freedom. This was my arsenal. My weapons weren't rifles and ammunition, but hard, undeniable facts. I spent hours scanning documents, the quiet hum of the machine a steady, comforting rhythm in the silent room. I scanned my official letter of promotion to sergeant, every military commendation I had ever received, every glowing email from a satisfied marketing client, and even high-resolution photos of my best artwork. This was the dossier of my inherent worth, the irrefutable proof of a life they had so stubbornly refused to see. Next, I created a second, ominous folder, evidence of manipulation. Into this went the complete audio file of my phone call with Eliza. I meticulously transcribed the text messages from my father and Lucas. Their words of veiled coercion, once insidious, now appeared stark and incriminating on the printed page. I wrote a detailed, chronological account of past events, from the casually discarded trophy to the brutal verbal abuse at Thanksgiving dinner. Each piece of evidence was a solid brick, and with them, I was constructing an impenetrable fortress around my new, hard-won life. A few nights later, an unexpected knock came at my door. My heart leaped into my throat, a sudden, panicked bird. I peered cautiously through the peephole. It was Lucas. He looked even worse than he had at the coffee shop, his face pale and drawn, his eyes hollowed out with exhaustion and something that looked eerily like shame. I opened the door slowly. "You were right," he whispered, his voice barely audible, thick with defeat. He couldn't meet my eyes. "After you hung up, Mom had a meltdown, a full-blown narcissistic rage. She blamed Sophia, said she had poisoned my mind against the family. Sophia couldn't take it anymore. She packed a bag and left. The news hit me, but I felt no satisfaction, only a profound, heavy sadness for the collateral damage." Then he held out a small, gleaming silver USB drive. "This is for you," he said, his voice strained. "Dad gave these to me for safekeeping a while ago. They're the statements for the trust funds our grandfather left for the three of us. I think you should look at yours, specifically the withdrawals over the last few years." He finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with a misery I'd never seen in him before. "I'm sorry, Isabella," he choked out, his voice thick with emotion, "for everything." Before I could respond, he turned abruptly and walked quickly down the hall, disappearing silently down the stairwell. My hands were trembling slightly as I closed the door. Leo and I plugged the USB drive into my laptop. We opened the files. A series of PDF bank statements appeared on the screen, a neat, innocuous column of dates and numbers. But those numbers told a story far more brutal and calculated than any verbal insult. For the last 10 years, ever since I had turned 18, my trust fund, my precious inheritance from the one person who truly believed in me, had been systematically drained. Large, regular withdrawals were made by Eliza, brazenly listed under vague, deceptive justifications like educational expenses or living support. But the dates and amounts were a perfect, sickening match for other events. A $20,000 withdrawal coincided exactly with the down payment Lucas needed for his first investment property. Another $10,000 withdrawal matched the month Charlotte bought herself a lavish designer wardrobe for her new law firm. Smaller, regular sums vanished every single month, likely subsidizing their country club memberships and exorbitantly expensive dinners. They had been embezzling from me. They had shamelessly stolen my inheritance to fund the extravagant lives of the golden children, all while simultaneously calling me a failure and a perpetual drain on their precious resources. The feeling of betrayal was so intense it was suffocating. A physical weight on my chest. This was not just emotional abuse anymore. This was a crime. This new, undeniable evidence changed absolutely everything. My plan shifted from a defensive posture to a full-fledged offense. This was no longer just a private family matter to be handled with careful boundaries. This was a legal and financial reckoning. I opened a new email. My fingers flew across the keyboard, my tone no longer that of a hurt daughter, but of a cold, detached lawyer. I addressed it directly to my parents, Charlotte and Lucas. The subject line was simple, stark, and utterly unambiguous: financial reconciliation. In the body of the email, I attached 2 damning files: the complete audio recording of my phone call with Eliza and the incriminating trust fund statements with the suspicious withdrawals highlighted in stark, undeniable red. I didn't ask for an apology. I didn't appeal to emotion. I made one clear, non-negotiable demand: the full and complete reimbursement of all funds taken from my account, with compound interest, to be deposited within 30 business days. Failure to comply, I wrote, my words precise and unyielding, would result in the entire dossier being handed over to my attorney for immediate legal proceedings. I took one last, steady look at the words on the screen. Then, with a firm, unwavering hand, I clicked send. The small apartment was silent. The bomb had been dropped. My email detonated a seismic shockwave through the Stone family's carefully constructed world. It was a digital bomb, and the fallout was immediate and devastating. Less than an hour after I hit send, my phone rang insistently. It was my father. His voice, usually so full of booming authority, was now thin and laced with a panicked tremor. He didn't yell or accuse, he stumbled over his words, pleading for an immediate family meeting to clear the air and discuss this unfortunate situation. I'll agree to a meeting, I told him, my voice preternaturally calm and measured, a stark contrast to his agitation. But it will be on my terms. It will take place at a neutral location of my choosing, at a time I set, and Leo will be present as my support. It was a non-negotiable condition. The days of me walking willingly into their lion's den alone, outnumbered and emotionally ambushed, were irrevocably over. He sputtered for a moment, clearly unaccustomed to being dictated to. But the raw desperation in his voice betrayed him. He reluctantly agreed. I remembered a core principle from my military training: always control the terrain. Their power, their very identity, was intrinsically linked to the opulent splendor of their Beacon Hill estate. I wasn't going to fight them on their home turf. I rented a sterile, anonymous conference room in a downtown office building for 1 hour. It was a soulless space with a long, scratched table, uncomfortable mesh chairs, and harsh, humming fluorescent lighting. There was no family history embedded in those walls, no lingering ghosts of my childhood to haunt me, no emotional triggers. It was a blank slate. Leo and I arrived 15 minutes early. I chose my seat strategically at the head of the table, a clear position of authority, and placed a single, unassuming manila folder directly in front of me. When the Stone family walked in, they looked utterly out of place, like aristocrats who had somehow taken a wrong turn into a drab government building. Stripped of the familiar backdrop of their immense wealth and assumed status, they seemed smaller, their expensive clothes looking more like ill-fitting costumes. The air of invincibility they usually wore had completely evaporated, replaced by a nervous, palpable tension. For the first time in my life, they were on my territory. I had complete, unyielding control. My father, Richard, ever the appeaser, started the proceedings, attempting to smooth things over with his usual empty, infuriating platitudes. "Now, Isabella, I'm sure this is all just a terrible misunderstanding," he began, forcing a weak, placating smile onto his face. "We are a family. We can work through anything if we just talk." Before I could respond, Charlotte jumped in, her voice sharp with the indignant fury of the privileged and entitled. She immediately went on the attack. "A misunderstanding, Dad. She's trying to extort us after everything this family has given you. How ungrateful can you be? This is nothing but pure greed, Isabella." Her accusations, which once would have pierced me to the core, now felt hollow and absurd. They were firing blanks into reinforced steel. I didn't even flinch. I simply tapped a deliberate finger on the manila folder in front of me. The cold, hard evidence inside was louder and more powerful than her tired, predictable insults. Across the table, Eliza was eerily silent, a stark contrast to her usual theatrical displays. Her face was a pale, tight mask of contained fury and dawning, gut-wrenching fear. Her eyes, usually so sharp and critically assessing, darted wildly between me and the folder. She knew, in that chilling moment, that she had lost complete, absolute control. Her usual tactics, the shouting, the belittling, the public shaming, were utterly useless here. So she resorted to her final, most potent weapon, the one she deployed when all else failed: tears. Her shoulders began to shake dramatically, and she produced a theatrical, heaving sob. "Isabella, how could you do this to your own mother?" she cried, her voice thick with manufactured pain and false victimhood. "After all I've done for you, I only ever wanted what was best." But this time the performance fell flat, utterly devoid of impact. The audience was no longer captive. It was Lucas who broke the spell. He had been silent since they arrived, his gaze fixed rigidly on the wood grain of the table. Now he looked up, his face etched with a profound, soul-deep wariness. A tragic understanding. "Stop, Mom," he said, his voice trembling but clear, cutting through her fake sobs with surgical precision. "Just stop it." He turned his gaze from her to our father and Charlotte, his eyes holding a new, painful clarity, a raw honesty. His next words landed like hammer blows in the silent room, shattering the remaining illusions. "We all know," he said, his voice gaining strength as he spoke the truth aloud. "We all know where that money came from. We knew, and we kept quiet. We took it. We benefited from it while Isabella was getting by on her own. She's not wrong. We are." The raw, unvarnished confession sucked all the oxygen out of the room. It was the final, fatal puncture to the bloated balloon of my family's entrenched hypocrisy. Charlotte's mouth fell open, stunned into a rare, slack-jawed silence. My father, the great enabler, slumped in his chair and buried his face in his hands, a pathetic portrait of long, overdue defeat. Eliza just stared at Lucas, her eyes wide with the horror of the ultimate betrayal. Her golden child had just confessed to the crime in front of witnesses. I let the heavy, damning silence hang in the air for a full, deliberate minute, letting them stew in the bitter truth they had ignored for a decade. Then I slowly rose to my feet, my movements deliberate and controlled, a testament to my newfound power. "I don't need your apologies," I said, my voice steady and clear, devoid of emotion. "They're worthless to me. I just want what is legally mine. The money will be returned to my account in full, with compound interest, as outlined in my email. But I have one additional non-negotiable condition. 4 pairs of broken, defeated eyes lifted slowly to meet mine, filled with dawning dread. From this day forward, my name will not be mentioned in your conversations. To your friends, to society, to each other, I no longer exist in the Stone family. You will grant me the peace of being forgotten by you. You will leave me alone. I opened the folder and slid a document across the table. This is a legally binding non-disclosure agreement drafted by my attorney. It stipulates that you will not discuss me, my life, or this settlement with any third party, ever. You will all sign it. I looked at each of their shattered faces, a silent, powerful acknowledgement of their defeat. This was the final act. I wasn't just getting my money back, I was taking my entire life back, reclaiming my very soul. Within 30 days, the full amount, plus interest, was wired to my bank account. The non-disclosure agreement arrived via courier, signed, perhaps begrudgingly, by all of them. The war was over. I had won. But instead of the pure, exhilarating triumph I had expected, a strange and profound emptiness settled over me. It was a disorienting quiet after a lifetime of deafening noise. For 28 years, I had been fighting a relentless war on two fronts. Fighting for their attention and validation, and in the end, fighting fiercely against their tyranny. Now that the enemy was vanquished and the objective secured, I felt adrift, unsure of my new purpose, a ship without a compass. One night, as I was staring blankly at the wall of my apartment, Leo wrapped his arms around me from behind, his presence a comforting warmth. He held me for a long, quiet moment, then spoke softly into my ear. "You're grieving, Isabella," he said, his voice gentle. "You're grieving the family you should have had?" He was profoundly right. I hadn't just severed a toxic relationship. I had performed a radical amputation on my own life. I had buried a part of my past, a deep-seated, childish hope that one day they might finally see me, truly see me. The pain of that loss was a dull, persistent ache, deeper and more complicated than I could have ever imagined. It was the sorrow of finally accepting that the home you've been desperately trying to get back into was never really your home at all. A week later, my father called. This time, there was no panic in his voice, only a deep, bone-weary exhaustion that touched my heart. He asked to meet me at a park bench along the Charles River, the very spot where he had taught me to ride a bicycle 2 decades ago. The memory felt like it belonged to another lifetime, to another, younger girl. We sat in silence for a long time, watching the gray water flow languidly toward the harbor as a cold wind whipped around us. He didn't look at me, just stared out at the distant horizon. "I'm sorry," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. The 2 words I had never once heard from him, sounding foreign and clumsy coming from his lips. "I was a coward, Isabella," he continued, his voice barely above a whisper, thick with regret. "I chose a false peace over protecting my own daughter. I let Eliza's fears and her darkness consume our entire family. I stood by and did nothing. He wasn't asking for my forgiveness. He wasn't asking me to come back. He was simply stating a fact, a raw confession into the cold Boston air. He finally looked at me, a flicker of something new and fragile in his tired eyes. "I am so proud of the woman you've become." We didn't hug, we didn't cry. We just sat there, 2 strangers connected by a shared, broken past. But it was a start, a small, fragile, and honest beginning. A different kind of beginning was happening with Lucas. He and Sophia invited me to their new apartment for coffee. It was surprisingly easy, with none of the old, strained tension. We spoke like adults, like peers, equals. Lucas told me haltingly at first, then with increasing resolve, that he had started seeing a therapist to learn how to untangle himself from our mother's pervasive influence, to finally find his own voice, his own identity. Sophia, who had since reconciled with him, talked openly about her fears and her hopes for raising their own children in a healthy, loving environment, free from the toxic, cyclical patterns of the past. As I was leaving, Sophia took my hand in both of hers, her grip firm and reassuring. "You broke the cycle, Isabella," she said, her eyes shining with genuine gratitude. "You gave us a chance to do it differently." I realized then that my relationship with my brother wasn't lost, it was being reborn. It was being rebuilt on a new foundation, not of shared trauma, but of mutual respect and hard-won honesty. That night, back in the solitude of my own apartment, I knew there was one last, symbolic thing I had to do. I pulled a dusty cardboard box from beneath my bed. It was my own secret museum of pain, filled with artifacts from the Stone family. I took out the old birthday cards with their generic, hollow wishes. I looked at the formal family photos where I was always standing slightly on the edge, an awkward afterthought, perpetually out of place. And at the very bottom, carefully wrapped in an old T-shirt, was the crystal art trophy, the one I had secretly rescued from the basement trash so many years ago. I carried the box out to my small balcony and carefully placed the contents into a sturdy metal basin. Then, with a steady, resolute hand, I lit a match. I watched, mesmerized, as the hungry flame caught the corner of a birthday card, the fire greedily licking at the scripted words. It curled the edges of the photographs, turning smiling faces into black, ephemeral ash. The crystal of the trophy cracked and crazed in the intense heat, yielding to the cleansing fire. As I watched the last remnants of my old life turn to smoke and disappear silently into the night sky, I felt no anger, no hatred, only a profound and quiet sense of peace, a deep stillness. My grandfather had always loved a verse from Deuteronomy: "Be strong and courageous. Do not be afraid, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you." I had always thought it was about an external power, a divine intervention. But I now understood the strength, the courage, the unwavering presence. It was all inside me. I wasn't burning the past to erase it, to pretend it never happened. I was releasing myself from its crushing weight, liberating my spirit. This was a cleansing fire, a final, powerful act of liberation. A year later, I stood in the middle of a spacious, light-filled studio in Boston's South End. The air was filled with the earthy, creative scents of oil paint, turpentine, and damp clay. Sunlight streamed gloriously through the large industrial windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden sprites. This place was my dream made real. This was the Warrior's Easel, a free art workshop I founded specifically for military veterans. Using a significant portion of the money I had reclaimed from my family, I had built not only a studio but a sanctuary. I watched as men and women, soldiers who had seen the unimaginable and carried the invisible wounds of war, found a quiet, unspoken language for their profound experiences. They worked in concentrated silence, their hands shaping pliable clay on a potter's wheel or moving a brush with deliberate strokes across a waiting canvas. They were, each of them, finding a path back to themselves, one stroke of paint, one sculpted form at a time. This, I realized with a swelling heart, was my true inheritance. I had taken the profound pain inflicted upon me and transformed it into a safe harbor for others. In the corner, Leo was patiently helping an older Vietnam veteran shape a lump of clay, his gentle guidance and quiet encouragement a perfect harmony in this sacred space. He was an inseparable, vital part of this new dawn. On Sundays, my new family would gather at the apartment Leo and I now shared. It was an easy, comfortable affair, filled with genuine affection. My father would come, quieter now, more observant, and always carrying a homemade apple pie, his own small, consistent offering of peace and reconciliation. Lucas and Sophia would bring my adorable niece, their beautiful baby girl, and our time was filled with joyous talk of her first steps and new words. Sarah, my forever friend, was always there, her bright laughter the constant, joyful soundtrack of our gatherings. We didn't talk about the past. We didn't need to. We talked about the future, about new projects, new hopes, new beginnings. There was no judgment in this room, no competition, no carefully veiled insults. There was only the warm, genuine affection of a family built not on the arbitrary ties of blood, but on the solid, unwavering foundation of choice, mutual respect, and unconditional love. I would look around the room at these cherished people, at the beautiful life we had all built together, and my heart would swell with a gratitude so profound it felt like a physical presence, a warm embrace. This was family. This was home. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I still thought of Eliza and Charlotte. That connection remained frozen in time, a door I had firmly closed and irrevocably locked. I heard through Lucas that they had moved out of Boston, perhaps selling the Beacon Hill brownstone, ostensibly to escape the whispers and the quiet judgment of a society that ironically prized image above all else. I no longer felt the hot sting of anger when I thought of them, only a distant, melancholic sadness for the women they were, and the mother and sister they could never truly be. One afternoon, I sat down and wrote a letter, not to mail, but for myself. Dear Mom, I wrote, I forgive you, not because you deserve it, or because what you did was okay. I forgive you because I deserve to be at peace. I'm letting go of the anger, not for you, but for me. I paused, then added one last, heartfelt line. I hope that one day you find some peace of your own. I folded the letter, sealed it carefully in an envelope with no address, and placed it gently in a box of things that truly mattered. My forgiveness didn't need to be received or acknowledged to be real. It was a precious gift I was finally giving to myself. The final image of my story isn't one of a dramatic, resounding victory, but of a quiet, powerful stillness. It's me standing in my studio after a workshop. I'm still in my army uniform from a drill weekend, but my hands are smudged with vibrant streaks of cadmium yellow and cerulean blue paint. The late afternoon sun streams gloriously through the large industrial windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air like tiny golden sprites. The unfinished canvases around the room each tell a story, a unique journey, a soul in the profound process of healing. I am a sergeant. I am an artist. I am a teacher. I am a friend. I am a partner. I am no longer a scapegoat or a stain on a family name. I am Isabella Stone. And from the shattered pieces of a cold Thanksgiving night, I have built my own damn dawn. My life now is a true work of art. That was my story, my journey from a cold Thanksgiving night to a self-made dawn. I know I am not the only one who has walked this path, who has faced adversity and chosen to rise. Your story of resilience, of finding your own light, matters just as much as mine. In the comments below, I would be honored if you shared one small, courageous step you took to build your own dawn, or one piece of advice you'd give to someone who is just starting their journey. If my story resonated with you, and you believe in the transformative power of narratives to heal and inspire, please subscribe to our channel for more stories of strength and triumph. Share this with someone who needs to hear that they are not a stain, but a masterpiece in the making.